And welcome back to Morning Live. Now, on Thursday, the National Assembly will debate a Democratic Alliance motion on the country's employment, or should we say unemployment crisis. And National Assembly Speaker Thandi Modise says that the debate is of national importance. South Africa's economy shrank by 3.2% in the first quarter, and unemployment rose to 29% in the second quarter of this year. And the expanded unemployment rate, which includes those who have literally given up on looking for work, now stands at 38.5%, or 10.2 million people, the highest unemployment rate since 2003. And to talk to us about this and, of course, other issues in the Democratic Alliance, I'm joined in studio by DA leader Mmusi Maimane. Thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, and it's my great privilege to be here, and good morning to fellow South Africans.
I think the one thing, Mr. Maimane, that all South Africans can agree on is that we have a crisis when it comes to the employment or unemployment situation, however you wish to look at it in this country.
Well, you know, it's been coming over a long period of time. South Africa's policy incoherence, the decisions that we've taken or lack of decisions we've taken at times have brought us to this point. And the reason I requested the debate to be in Parliament is because this is where citizens send their representatives to go and discuss their issues. And I'm saying we need to find solutions that move beyond party lines, starting with the constitutional obligation that says we need to be able to guarantee citizens' rights. Now, a hungry citizen is not going to have their rights guaranteed. Clearly, the poor people in this country are on the rise. It's clear to me that South Africa needs to be able to make decisions about SOEs, needs to make decisions about how do we help small businesses, how do we ensure that cities take a forefront, how do we ensure that our citizens are safe. And so we'll be tabling a plan on Thursday to say, here are the immediate steps that we need to put to ensure that our economy begins to create the requisite work, begins to grow, and that we can ensure that the livelihood of our citizens is looked after.
And I'd imagine you don't necessarily want to go into the details of that plan at this stage, but in broad strokes, you know, what sort of proposals are you putting forward?
Well, for us, we've been saying a number of things, and we've tabled a 10-point plan. The first is obviously we've got to deal with state-owned enterprises. We've got to break down what is happening at Eskom. We've got to split it into two entities, one for generation and one for build. Secondly, we need to make a decision about things like SAA. You know, the fact of the matter is that we don't have enough police to look after what's going on in Johannesburg or in all other cities, mainly because we're taking money and bailing out SAA every single time. So we need to make decisions about SOEs that are a fiscal drain, and the natural consequence of it means that citizens now don't have their safety protected. Furthermore, we've got to talk about how do we stimulate micro-enterprise. Small businesses are the future of this country. And if we don't help small businesses by exempting them from cumbersome labor legislation, it means they can't create jobs. Furthermore, I think cities must be at the forefront of that. Cities is where we break down big tenders to allow for small businesses to participate. Along with that, we are of the view that there are certain key sectors we must be able to intervene in. For example, why is it that someone cannot arrive in South Africa and be able to get a visa at entrance, at port, so that as you arrive at OR Tambo, you can apply for a visa and it can be granted there electronically so that we can have more tourists coming into the country and allowing more routes to come to South Africa, because we've got great assets. We've got a beautiful country. How are we looking at policy certainty around mining, around agriculture, so that we make sure that we give certainty around issues like expropriation without compensation? You can't deny the fact that our farmers, the net farming output is declining because there's uncertainty. People don't want to invest in that sector. We want that investment. And then furthermore, the economy of South Africa must be future-looking. We must decide how do we transition in a world of high technology, in a climate-changing society, and ultimately making sure that our citizens are much more healthier. So when we look towards the future, it's going to be important that already now we start to prepare young people for an economy that is coming, that is upon them. So we need bold leadership decisions now. And the problem with our country is that it feels like we are spectators to a divorce taking place in the ruling party between two factions, and our country is leaderless when our nation desperately now needs us to stand up and be counted and say, here's the way we are going to go. If you don't toe that line, we need to be able to take decisive action.
Now, let's juxtapose those proposals that you set out against what is actually happening in South Africa. You look at youth unemployment is in excess of 56% in this country. It's not just a South African problem, it's an African problem, and perhaps other parts of the world not as concentrated. In Africa, you have over 200 and, I was looking at this earlier, 280 million youth unemployed on this continent. And we can't look at it and say it's not our problem, because we see what's playing out in Gauteng today as you and I sit here. The ILO, the International Labour Organization, they pointed this out already, where they said that youth unemployment in Africa is unsustainably high. And if we don't attend to youth unemployment, we will see the threats to social cohesion that are playing out in front of our very eyes right now. So what are we supposed to do about these issues right now, today?
You know, when I spoke earlier on about a national civilian service, what we need is a program, a national program, that gives young people a one-year internship program across various sectors of government, private sector, and NGO sector, so that we can absorb, at least we've worked out the numbers to close to about 70,000 young people we can absorb in that space, give them a year. Because one thing we know is that our young people are not just unemployed, but many of them are unemployable. And that's a function of our poor education system. It's a function of the fact that 80% of our kids cannot read for meaning by the age of 10. So therefore, it creates this bubble of young people who are available, and many of them are unemployable. So I'm asking to give us a year's internship program so that those young people can learn the skills. We can skill them up so that they can go sell those skills. The second challenge is that we've got a graduate unemployment level. And that speaks to macroeconomic conditions about how do we assist in setting up a fund or a national venture fund that can allow young people to be able to start their own small businesses. What are the incentives that we're giving to people to ensure that people can come into places of work? We've always fought for a much broader a youth wage subsidy, where if you come into a place of work, we can say to companies, we will use tax as an opportunity for you to absorb youth into places of work, rather than using tax to bloat the state. So even currently right now, the big decision that we should have made, and when you say the ILO have cited these things for a long time, we need fiscal maneuverability so that we've got the finance to be able to invest in these programs. We should have cut the cabinet. We should have cut SOEs. And we should have already by now starting to say, how do we sell equity in SAA so we get strategic partners, so that that financial reserve we can use for purposes of youth internship programs.
So someone listening who works for SAA or any other state-owned enterprise, along with the unions, would say, well, yeah, you could do that, but won't that just further exacerbate our unemployment problem? Because the reality is that once the private sector steps in, they perhaps are not as, what would the word be? They would be a lot less accommodating when it comes to things like cutting jobs if the bottom line isn't looking good. So they would be a lot more brutal in that sense than perhaps the state is at the moment when it comes to those issues.
Well, that's the flaw in the fact that what you then tend to do is you say you will protect the employed at the expense of the unemployed. That's what unions tend to do. My issue is not that I want unabated job losses in state-owned enterprises. I'm asking for equity partnerships so that we can get better efficiencies there. You've got people who are sitting in management positions in many of the state-owned enterprises, and you cannot derive value. Cannot derive the output of the productivity that we are discussing. So my voice is the voice for the unemployed. And I'm saying that when we bring out equity partners, you cannot deny the fact that there's been financial wastage at SAA. You cannot deny the fact that Eskom is bloated when it comes to the number of people who are employed, how people were remunerated. You look at Brian Molefe, he's brought us to an entity right now, yet he was paid fortunes of money. So the financial management of SOEs, the people management of SOEs, mainly because they don't have to compete. Therefore, I'm saying if you want to bring efficiencies, let's allow competition in the public sector also, and let's make sure that we look after the unemployed. We cannot run a situation upon which unions create a power base upon which we end up not changing policy. We end up in a space where the unemployment numbers are increasing. And frankly, I think it's about time we have a conversation about 10.2 million people.
And we should. And what about the developmental agenda and all of this? You know, you were talking earlier about the fact that not only do we need people employed, we need them to be healthy in order to be employed. You've got issues that we're grappling with at the moment, like the NHI. And what's your position on that as the Democratic Alliance? In principle, are you in agreement with the broad policy framework on which the NHI is premised?
Look, I think NHI is certainly will make the nuclear deal look like child's play. No one can deny the fact that we want to give universal health access. But what we can deny is that what we should not be doing, NHI is just another way of calling state health insurance. It absorbs all other insurance agencies and then says, let's create one that is called the state. Now, there's a history of state-owned enterprises, as we've just lamented, that deliver the same outcomes. They become mismanaged. All the pilot studies on NHI have come back to say it has not worked. So we pilot something, we throw billions and billions of rand into it. We've already spent 5 billion rands and had no consequences. Furthermore, there's a constitutional question about whether provinces who have the capability to deliver healthcare are going to lose that ability. And therefore, it must be challenged. I am asking, let's create a universal healthcare access. As a DA, we've put on the table a policy called Sizani, which says to us, how do we, at a primary level, give access to all citizens across all primary healthcare institutions, regardless of whether they're insured or uninsured? Let's use tax credits to be able to bolster that system so that people can gain access at that level. Furthermore, let's strengthen institutions that are working. There are incredible public hospitals that we need to strengthen and give the right leadership to. So if you want, for example, liver work done, I think Groote is an incredible hospital. And it's a public hospital. It doesn't need NHI to do that. You just need to make sure the leadership that is there continues to do that work that they are doing. And then allow for people who derive private healthcare cover to be able to get access to that and pay for it. So to me, I think that dogma that says that the state should be at the center of development is fundamentally flawed. It will deliver the outcomes that we've seen now. What we need is a partnership.
But why is it flawed?
It is flawed because state-led economic development, when you look at its premise, we know the capability of the state, and we know very clearly that it doesn't exist. In fact, when you look at...
But the argument would be, for example, in the healthcare sector, the very first world heart transplant was done at a state hospital, the very same Groote that you refer to. If you look at some of the specialized unit at state hospitals, they are some of the best, not just in the country, in the world. Some great work is being done there. So what is wrong with that?
Part of it depends on the fact that it seeks good competition. It allows for private health care, private health facilities to be available. It's a view. No economy is ever exclusively one thing or another. But if you say the state must be the driver of everything, you lose certain efficiencies because the state has other objectives. So if you look at a state-run airline, as an example, the objective of the state is to keep people employed who are working within that, rather than the efficiency of the airline. So when you compare SAA, SA Express, you can see that it's been declining in revenue even when fuel prices were low. So if you keep putting the state at the center of it all, you then lose efficiencies of competition. And what I'm saying is that actually competition is healthy. All of us. We do better when we're competing. So furthermore, so where there are state institutions that are doing well, we must encourage them and they must keep going. But that is not to say that they must be the center of all development. It is to say we live in a mixed economy, and ultimately what we desperately need is to allow that competition and for innovation to come through different sectors.
I don't think you're going to get much argument on that, because when it comes to, for example, an SAA, many would agree that perhaps is a bit of a vanity project. But when it comes to education, when it comes to healthcare, there's a very different argument to be made there in terms of access to quality education and access to quality healthcare for all citizens, not just for those who can afford to pay for quality education or healthcare.
In fact, the converse is true. In fact, the converse is even much truer. So when we look at education, that's a great example. One of the things I've proposed, and I'll keep fighting for, is an idea of charter schools, which is a partnership between private schools and public schools. It's not cost, it's cost neutral. We make sure that we give our kids the best education possible. Where your example is very opposite even in education is that all of it has been state-led, and still today 80% of our kids by the time they reach the age of 10 cannot read for meaning.
But is that not a function of perhaps the inability to effectively implement, as opposed to the entire idea being wrong?
The state often suffers at that point. And what I'm saying is, imagine if a child who lives in Dobsonville, where I come from, the state already has an asset in that it's got the buildings. Why don't we invite the private sector to say, you can come and run the school, we will give you the land, give us the best education for those kids. You know, it would change the trajectory of the kids in Dobsonville. Imagine in a rural community, we said, let's set up a charter school, a partnership between public and private. We've got the assets. Let's allow private sector to come and bring innovation and change so that we can develop education. Suddenly, you're creating world-class citizens across the country, rather than simply saying your only hope is to depend on the state upon which already the outcomes are being proven that the state has not been able to implement. We need a radical change in this country. We cannot keep the same dogma and hope for different outcomes.
We're running out of time. I have to quiz you on Eskom and the unbundling of Eskom and the Democratic Alliance's take on that matter.
Yeah. We've always said that we've tabled already in Parliament the cheaper energy bill. We're saying we must split it into two, have a generation company and a build company. So the build will own the assets that exist at the moment, so the power stations, but then a distribution company would ensure that it is able to procure energy from different sources, so that we allow independent power producers to come on board, so that we can bring sustainable energy to come so from other different sectors, green energy, so that ultimately for the consumer, competition makes it cheaper. It means municipalities who have the capability can purchase energy directly. And it means that Eskom issues a statement that says if they grow anymore, it will mean if the economy grows, they can't give the energy for it. And I'm saying we've got IPPs that are available so that we can give energy to sectors, so that we can grow the economy and create work for our citizens.
So as it stands, the proposal at the moment to split it into three components, what's your view on that?
It's one clearly that proposal has been shelved because the president doesn't have the political power to be able to implement that.
Meaning?
Well, he has no backbone. He announced it at last year's State of the Nation address, then he backtracked on it, and then the ANC has taken on a different view. So it's clear that all they're now hoping for is to keep more bailouts going towards Eskom, and already Parliament is discussing another 57 billion rands to try and underwrite Eskom. It's a bad move. Eskom's diversification. So for us, we keep saying, split it into two. That proposal has been on the table. We are fighting for it. And we're saying that we can allow other independent power producers to come on board and more jobs can be created in those sectors.
What's your take on the current group of IPPs that have been absorbed by Eskom?
There's been some, they're not enough. And I think if you want to actually give people more power, let them be much more aggressive, much bigger. Give them a market to do so. Let cities like Johannesburg, who can buy energy directly, be able to do so. One of the reasons that even a city like Cape Town took the government to court so that it can actually procure energy directly was to ensure that we mitigate against load shedding so that the economy can continue to grow. So we are already at work demonstrating the fact that we don't need to be held ransom by Eskom. We can in fact purchase energy directly. That's why when you look at the Western Cape as an example, unemployment levels there are already at 14 points lower than the rest of the country. So I'm arguing the case to say there is a model that works. We mustn't be dogmatic. That's why when you just simply say the state must be the provider of everything, you end up with such problems at Eskom. I'm saying allow independent power producers to come on board so that we can diversify energy.
Is it transformative enough in nature?
Absolutely. Who's to say that those IPPs cannot be owned by South Africans who are black, who come from a diverse community?
The question is, are they owned by South Africans who are black at the moment?
Of course they are. And many of them have come on board in that way. And I want more businesses who are diverse, transformative, to own the economy. Of course they are. And therefore, I really believe the agenda of the future of South Africa is that we must believe that citizens and work with citizens who are innovative, who can come up with new solutions and actually be given market share. The belief that government is the answer to all our problems is flawed, and therefore I want a partnership between public and private so that we can build a South Africa for all. That's the hope, and we've shown we can do it.
I am loath to end the conversation, but I have to. Thank you so much for stopping by, Mmusi Maimane.
Much appreciated.
So much that I still wanted to talk about, but unfortunately time doesn't allow for. That was DA leader Mmusi Maimane speaking to us. The National Assembly will on Thursday, the 5th of September, debate a motion that was brought by the Democratic Alliance on the country's employment crisis.